This little video is in response to the comments I had on my previous video about dressing grinding wheels. And it comes to a bit of a surprise to me that there's some of you that really abuse your grinding wheels. Well, that's entirely up to you. But what I find somewhat strange is several of you, and I've had a couple of phone calls this morning, several of you have got good workshops, you've got lathes and you've got milling machines. So I have to ask myself, well, what do you do when the tool you're using loses its edge? Do you send it to the in-house cutter grinding shop? Well, you wouldn't be watching this video if you was in that league. Or do you throw them away and put in it and buy a new one? If you do that, can I have your old ones, please? But then they'd probably all be rounded and blue and all lovely shades of purple. On second thoughts, now don't bother. They'd be no good to man nor beast. So when you've got multi-fluted milling cutters, and here this is just a 4-flute, you could, I suppose, if you're really good, just touch them up by hand. But I haven't seen anyone do that really successfully. And if you're not looking after these, you couldn't do it anyway. You've got to have some sort of jig or fixture or cutter grinder. Here I've put the 4-flute milling cutter in a chuck, set it up with a square for vertical, so we've got two faces which are vertical and 2 at 90 degrees horizontal, obviously. And I've set a stop up on the end, so as far as I can only come, so that the bottom flute just misses the side of the wheel. We only ever grind on the face of the wheel. So let me just explain this a little bit better, perhaps. If I just move in as far as I can, don't think I can go any further without with it being out of focus. And the stop comes so that with a piece of paper I can just slide it behind the bottom fluke and the wheel, and as you can see it's not touching, and that's as far as it will come. So providing I turn this 90 degrees 4 times, I can make all flukes identical. If you're going to attempt to do this by hand, you're going to have one which is more prouder than the others, in which case you might as well use a single point tool. Perhaps you're doing that. More on that shortly. Anyway, we'll just sharpen this one up. take your time, you should be able to get results like that. It's highly debatable whether you could do that freehand. When it comes to these little devils, no way. My camera won't focus that small, but you can see for yourself. You've got to have jigs to use something that small. In the process of sharpening some various cutters this morning, I had a problem with me cutter grinder, so I took it apart and took it off the table in order to clean it up and do some maintenance. And the problem I had was that the adjuster that moves the slide backwards and forwards, the little grub screw that goes through this shaft, had sheared off. And the reason was, let's pan back, the reason was that this piece that travels up and down on the dovetail has a bolt that holds the pivot pillar in there, and that screws in so. Okay, and the head of this bolt travels within this piece I've milled out here. But I hadn't quite taken enough out, and you can see where it's been rubbing along here. So I've took it apart, cleaned it up, and just simply ground a little bit off the end of that set screw. So that's cleared that. And at the same time I've re-drilled and tapped that and put another set screw through there, so that's fine. Set screw in that end that pushes. I thought this is a golden opportunity for those who want to build one of these to not necessarily copy me, because I would do it differently if I had another chance, but perhaps you can learn from a couple of not wonderful ideas that I had. Not exactly faux pas, but I would do things differently. As I say about the dovetails being up the other way, stop grit getting in. Let's see if I can zoom into that. You see how want it go further? Yes. You can see how the dovetails are made. There's a little gib strip on that slide, and of course there's one on this slide as well, and they're adjusted by little set screws. And the gib strip has got little indentations so it stays put, but the actual surfaces, in other words, it's to take up play, as everything, you know, must eventually wear. Same sort of thing you've got on your lathe and everything else. Anyway, no dimensions, because by now you should know I don't damn well work with dimensions, not anything specific. It's what I can find. So I found a piece of plate, and it's sort of that bit big, and that bolts to me bench. It pivots at this point, and there's a second bolt here which I've elongated to give me a little bit of movement in that direction. Okay, let's do that up. So there's a gib strip there, and there's 3 adjusters for it there. Okay, this piece can be adjusted. I needn't have done that. That was a waste of machining time, but it does allow me to move this laterally that way. But I wasn't thinking, because I already had it on there. Ah, dear, oh dear. And then the various heads. Well, this one is just simply a chuck. That tightens the chuck up, and that secures the chuck within this simple aluminium frame. But perhaps I'd better just point out, oh, they're undone, that it doesn't slide all the way through. On this particular one, it should come out. Alright, we'll take it out from the other end. Undo that. That's what tightens the the jaws. The actual chuck comes from an old brace, by the way. Told you I always use what I can get hold of. Okay, that should push out that way, that's okay. We have a shoulder here, and that shoulder sits and there. You've got to have a reference so that when you turn this for different facets, it's still in this. You've got to have some form of register. If I was doing that differently, instead of having this shoulder in this piece, I mean I'll leave that now, but if you was making this, I would have machined that down and had your shoulder at this end. That would have given you a much more versatile arrangement. But you know, you learn on these things, don't you? Anyway, we'll reassemble the thing and give it an oil up, and perhaps I can show it a little bit better. Okay then, sorry to repeat myself, but while I've got it apart, this is an opportunity. So this piece slides in that direction, and this slides in that direction. Okay? This, talk about not exactly faux pas, but how I would do things differently. My travel this way is limited by how much I've machined this out, because the bolt hits it. I mean, it's enough in my case. But thinking about it, I needn't have machined that out at all. I could have used a countersink set screw on that, in which case I'd have had a greater travel. But that's hindsight, you see. So what I'm really doing here today is showing you all my cock-ups. Anyway, I'll carry on and reassemble, and perhaps I can point out one or two other little improvements you might like to make. This design, which, well, it's sort of evolved as I made it, but you can see it's pretty simple. Everything now is lovely and free and oiled up. The stop is nothing more than a little right angled piece bolted with a nut and a lock nut to determine how far that comes over. It's that simple. And then the aluminium various heads I use. This one being the chuck, which you've already seen. Just temporarily put that on. It's held on by one set screw, as you can see. And the advantage is that I can angle this to determine the rake angle of the cutter I'm working on. Now, that's fine if I want all this adjustment, but quite a lot of work I've done in the past has involved one size of cutter only. So keeping things nice and simple, I simply made this block up exactly the same as that. But in this case it's ultra simple. All I've done here is put a washer on this end to stop the cutter going too far down, and that's bolted on that way. That's bolted on, of course, and nipped up by that bit, same as the other one. And it means this washer represents a register for how far the cutter is out of this holder for when I turn it. So there's a brief glimpse of my cutter grinder head. I don't know how else to show it. It really is quite simple. I'm sure with a little bit of thought and the information I've given you here, you can come up with a much more sophisticated and something much nicer. As I say, if I was doing it again, I would slightly alter the geometry. Certainly wouldn't have this bolt protruding underneath. May have moved that perhaps over this way further so that this handle didn't come immediately over the top of, because that's in the way, do you know what I mean? Well, that's quite handy to do a nipping action like that. Anyway, don't ask me for dimensions. I've shown you all I can. Hope you enjoyed that. Just before I go, because my tea's ready, this sort of nippy up squeezy arrangement. I use a lot. It's pretty old school, but I use it on a lot of my things I make. This division plate uses exactly the same principle. These cheeks, these plates are bored out, and then a slitting saw is run through here, and it allows me to take up any wear that is beautifully smooth. And if I wish to tighten it up, I just simply do up these set screws. I'm sure you're aware of that, but just thought I'd mention it. Anyway, I'm being hollered. Tea's on the table.